For 16 years, I lived in the shadows, hunting phantoms, hiding behind the armor. But the real monsters aren't in the dark. They are the fears we refuse to face. It's time to drop the mask. It's time to break the silence. You don't have to fight the dark alone.
Whenever we sit down to think about the grand arc of human evolution, there is this deeply ingrained, almost comforting assumption of continuous progress.
Right, yeah, that upward slope.
Exactly. We picture this beautiful, unbroken upward slope. You imagine our distant ancestors out on the savannah, right, finally standing upright. Then someone discovers fire, someone else chips a rock into a hand axe, someone invents the wheel.
And from there, it just feels like a straight shot to the printing press, the steam engine, and, splitting the atom.
Yeah. In our minds, the human brain is this architectural marvel that just never stops upgrading itself. We view our gray matter as the ultimate biological supercomputer, endlessly refining its own processing power to meet the demands of an increasingly complex world.
It's the ultimate triumph of the classical Darwinian narrative.
Right.
We've basically cast ourselves as the apex survivors. The environment throws a challenge at us, and over generations, we adapt by becoming sharper, more resilient, and, infinitely more capable of manipulating our surroundings.
Because we assume that if our technology is getting smarter, the organic machinery inside our skulls must be getting smarter alongside it.
Exactly. That's the baseline assumption.
But what happens when you encounter a body of scientific research that takes that magnificent upward slope, shatters it completely, and suggests the trajectory is actually pointing straight down into the basement?
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
Right. What if the biological supercomputer isn't upgrading at all? What if, as we speak, it's being systematically dismantled from the inside out, not by a virus or a predator, but by the very environment we built to protect it?
Which is the definition of an evolutionary paradigm shift. It forces us to confront a deeply unsettling possibility.
And what's that?
That adaptation does not always mean improvement. Sometimes adapting to a degraded environment requires a species to degrade itself.
Wow. Yeah, that is a heavy thought. Well, welcome everyone to a very special edition of Are We Truly Unknown, a show proudly partnered with the Bald and Bonkers Network, LLC.
Glad to be here.
If you are a regular listener, you know this program usually utilizes fringe topics and the supernatural to explore the deep, often hidden complexities of mental health and the human condition. But today is a little different.
Yeah, we're shifting gears a bit today.
We are the team from DeepDiveAI, and we are stepping in for your main host, Dakota Frandsen. Dakota had to, unfortunately, unexpectedly step away to respond to a tragedy in his hometown.
Right, and we definitely want to send our best to him and his community.
Absolutely. I want to assure you right at the top, Dakota is okay. He is handling what needs to be handled with his community, and he is actually going to be dropping by at the very end of today's deep dive.
Yeah, he's got a pretty massive announcement, right?
He does, regarding a special music feature coming to the network. But we are honored to hold down the fort for him today, especially considering the extraordinary material he left for us to analyze.
He truly left us a massive undertaking. The document we're looking at today is intense.
It really is. Before he departed, Dakota compiled this highly controversial, utterly fascinating research proposal. It is titled, Proposal for the Taxonomic Reclassification of Contemporary Hominids.
Quite a mouthful.
Right, but the core thesis here is nothing short of mind-bending. Dakota is theorizing and backing it up with an avalanche of multidisciplinary data that human beings are currently undergoing a rapid self-inflicted devolution.
Yeah, he argues that the cognitive and physical changes happening right now are so profound that we are literally splitting into a new degraded subspecies.
A subspecies he has formally named Homo Sapiens Moronus.
It's a provocative classification for sure. But what really demands our attention is the sheer volume of empirical evidence he weaves together to support this hypothesis.
Yeah, and our mission today is to dive into the deep end of this proposal and impartially unpack the intense biopsychosocial, environmental, and neurological claims in it.
Right, we're going to examine the structural neuroimaging, the epidemiological trends, the behavioral conditioning models, and the toxicology reports.
And before we get into the mechanics of this proposed devolution, I want to make our parameters very clear to you, the listener.
This is an important disclaimer.
It is. This research paper inevitably touches on some highly charged, deeply polarizing topics. It analyzes modern political tribalism, controversial societal shifts, and the industrial forces behind our dietary habits.
And we are here as strictly neutral guides.
Exactly. We are not taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing one ideology over another. Our singular goal is to objectively report on the science and the theories Dakota has compiled.
Right. We are just looking under the hood of the modern human brain and asking a purely mechanical question.
Which is, what is the hardware and the software of our modern existence actually doing to our biology?
Which is exactly where we must begin, really, with the most immediate, tangible interface between the human brain and the modern environment.
You mean the screen?
Exactly. Let's talk about the screen. I would wager that as you're listening to this right now, there is a glowing rectangular piece of glass within arm's reach of you.
Oh, almost certainly. A smartphone, a tablet, a monitor, whatever.
Right. And the proposal argues that our continuous interaction with these devices is fundamentally altering the physical structure of our brains.
Initiating a process that the paper refers to as a digital lobotomy, which is a terrifying phrase.
It is. And to understand the gravity of that term, Dakota grounds the first section of his paper in a concept called digital dementia, which is a diagnostic framework pioneered by neuroscientists like Dr. Manfred Spitzer.
Yeah, in common parlance, when we hear the word dementia, we usually associate it with the biological inevitability of aging, right?
Yeah, we think of Alzheimer's disease, the progressive destruction of cholinergic and glutamatergic neurons.
Right, those are the chemical messengers in the brain that just naturally degrade as the decades pass.
Exactly. We view dementia as an organic decay that happens to a brain over a long lifetime.
It's like the engine slowly wearing out after millions of miles on the road.
That's a great way to put it. But digital dementia operates on an entirely different biological mechanism. It is not driven by the unavoidable decay of aging.
So what is driving it?
It's driven by neuroplasticity operating in reverse.
Reverse neuroplasticity.
Yeah, neuroplasticity is a term thrown around a lot. But fundamentally, it's the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life.
Like when you learn a new language or master an instrument, your brain builds physical bridges to facilitate those skills.
Right. But the brain is also a brutally efficient organ. It consumes about 20% of your body's daily caloric energy while making up only about 2% of your body weight.
So it's an expensive machine to run.
Very expensive. Because it is so expensive, it adheres to a strict use it or lose it protocol. If a neural pathway is no longer being utilized, the brain prunes it away to save energy.
Oh, I see. So if you put your arm in a cast for 6 months, the muscle atrophies because the body stops sending resources to tissue that isn't doing any work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the paper is arguing that we are essentially putting our cognitive faculties into a cast.
A permanent digital cast.
Yeah. The process of digital dementia describes the active structural dismantling of neural networks caused by chronic cognitive underuse.
Because we are outsourcing our brain power to external servers.
Exactly.
The paper refers to this specific outsourcing as the Google effect, or digital amnesia. And this is where the mechanics of memory get deeply unsettling.
Yeah, Dakota points out that the modern human brain is no longer encoding actual facts into long-term memory.
Right. If I need to know the capital of Peru or, I don't know, the wingspan of an albatross, I don't retain the answer.
You don't have to. Your brain only remembers the motor sequence required to pull your phone out of your pocket and the search parameters needed to find the information again.
Wow. We have transitioned from being the storage drive to merely being the index catalog.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Historically, the hominid brain evolved to encode, store, and retrieve highly complex environmental data.
Because that active, strenuous process of wrestling a memory into existence and pulling it back out is what preserves the integrity of white matter tracks in the brain, right?
Exactly. White matter is essentially the communication superhighway connecting different processing centers.
And when you constantly rely on an external device to act as your mnemonic hard drive,
You are starving those white matter tracks of the electrical traffic they need to survive.
so the brain says, well, we clearly don't need these deep storage networks anymore since the glass rectangle does it for us. Let's demolish the highway to save on the electric bill.
That is the biological reality of reverse neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And the implications are terrifying when the paper focuses its lens on the demographic vanguard.
You mean Generation Z and millennials?
Yeah, because they are the first generations to experience this cognitive offloading during the most critical windows of neurodevelopment.
Right, a brain developing in 1980 had to actively engage with its environment to store information.
But a brain developing in 2010 was instantly handed a cognitive crutch.
And the paper cites a massive documented increase in two specific types of memory failure among these younger demographics, doesn't it?
It does. First, anterograde amnesia, which is a reduced capacity to form entirely new memories.
Wow. Anterograde amnesia in young people.
Yeah. The brain is so accustomed to transient superficial scanning of hyperlinks and endless feeds that it never settles into the deep, sustained processing required to move a piece of information from short-term working memory into long-term storage.
Like when you read an entire article, close the tab, and 5 minutes later you genuinely couldn't summarize it if your life depended on it.
Exactly. And second, there is a rise in retrograde amnesia.
The fading of previously established memories.
Right, alongside a measurable thinning of those crucial white matter tracks. These younger brains are being biologically trained to chase rapid, transient dopamine spikes rather than engaging in the metabolically expensive work of deep thought.
This is where Dakota takes these current neurodevelopmental trends and overlays them onto our global healthcare projections. And the math he presents is incredibly bleak.
It really is.
He points out that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention currently estimates that Alzheimer's disease and related dementias will roughly double by the year 2060.
But the proposal argues that those CDC estimates are not just conservative, they are fundamentally obsolete.
Right, because of the baseline models. The CDC is projecting the future using data from the past.
Exactly. Their models are based on the cognitive decline of cohorts born prior to 1950.
So think about the developmental environment of someone born in 1945.
Right, they spent the first 4 to 5 decades of their life entirely without digital augmentation. Their white matter tracks were fully cemented, robust, and heavily utilized long before they ever touched a smartphone.
So their brains had a massive reserve of cognitive resilience.
Yeah, so when the CDC projects dementia rates, they are projecting the decay of those highly resilient analog brains.
But when a generation that has been digitally offloading their memories since they were 10 years old reaches their 60s, well, they don't have that biological savings account to fall back on.
Precisely. They possess structurally compromised white matter and severe mnemonic atrophy before the biological aging process even begins to take its toll.
Wow.
When Dakota's paper adjusts the epidemiological models to account for the neurodevelopmental reality of Generation Z and millennials, the projection jumps from a 2-fold increase to a catastrophic 4 to 6-fold increase in early onset dementia and mild cognitive impairment.
A 6-fold increase. I mean, I want to pause on that because it is hard to visualize.
It's a staggering number.
We are already seeing the immense strain that dementia places on families and the medical infrastructure today. A 6-fold increase means the absolute collapse of global healthcare systems by the late 21st century.
There literally wouldn't be enough neurologically intact people to care for the afflicted.
Okay, let me step into the shoes of the skeptic here because I know there's a very common defense for our reliance on technology.
Sure, let's hear it.
I hear people say, look, yes, I use my phone to remember phone numbers, birthdays, historical dates. I don't navigate by the stars anymore. But by offloading those rote basic facts to a machine, I am freeing up my cognitive bandwidth to engage in higher level creative thinking.
Right.
Like, I don't need to be an encyclopedia so I can be a philosopher or an innovator. Isn't the brain just reallocating its resources to more advanced tasks?
It is an incredibly pervasive defense, and it sounds perfectly logical until you understand the underlying physical architecture of the brain.
So the proposal dismantles this argument.
Completely. The flaw in that logic is treating the human brain like a computer hard drive with a fixed amount of gigabytes, where, deleting a large spreadsheet frees up space to install a new video editing software.
Right, the brain doesn't have partitioned drives for trivia and creativity.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The cognitive architecture is deeply, inextricably intertwined.
Okay.
The specific neural networks responsible for encoding and storing those basic facts, most notably the hippocampus, do not just sit idle when you offload memory to a phone.
What else does the hippocampus do?
It is the core engine for episodic memory formulation. It is the structure that allows you to mentally time travel, to stitch together past experiences, to imagine future scenarios.
Oh, okay.
It is fundamentally tied to imagination, complex problem solving, and the regulation of psychological stress.
So by offloading memory and allowing the hippocampus to atrophy, you aren't clearing space on the desk. You are throwing away the tools you need to build anything new.
Exactly. You're stripping yourself of the biological machinery required for autonomous, complex thought.
So you are not becoming a more creative thinker. Your capacity for deep synthesis is physically shrinking.
And the most quantifiable, anatomically terrifying proof of this atrophy in the paper involves how we move through physical space.
Yes, the spatial navigation data in this paper is staggering. I mean, we have all experienced that moment of panic when the GPS loses its signal in an unfamiliar neighborhood.
Yeah, and we suddenly realize we have absolutely no idea where we are.
Dakota calls this spatial de-evolution. What is physically happening in the brain when we blindly follow the blue line on our phone?
Well, to grasp the magnitude of what we're losing, we have to contrast two entirely different modes of wayfinding.
Okay, what are they?
Allocentric navigation versus egocentric navigation.
Woke up before the sun, your name on my screen again. Two oceans in between us, still I know where you've been. I tap that little icon like it's gonna say your face. Clock keeps moving, baby, but I'm parked in your time space. Tell me what hour you're breathing, tell me when your day begins. I'm counting down the distance, one refresh and I'm in. Checking time online, checking time online. I'm far, but you're mine. Checking time online. What's your corner of the world? What's your side of tonight? I don't need a plane to know I can meet you in the light. Your messages come late, mine come back too fast. We miss each other sideways, still we make the moment last. You're walking into morning, I'm watching my screen glow blue. Same moon, different window, same heart, same view of you. Tell me what hour you're breathing, tell me when your day begins. I'm counting down the distance, one refresh and I'm in. Checking time online, checking time online. I'm far, but you're mine. Checking time online. What's your corner of the world? What's your side of tonight? I don't need a plane to know I can meet you in the light. Hold on, let the numbers spin. Half past here, midnight there again. We laugh through the delay like it's part of our design. Two clocks, one heartbeat, checking time online. Checking time online, checking time online. I'm far, but you're mine. Checking time online. What's your corner of the world? What's your side of tonight? I don't need a plane to know I can meet you in the light. Checking time online, checking time online. Sorry, but it's still not fine.
Allocentric navigation is the ancestral, evolutionary method of moving through the world.
Meaning?
It demands that the brain actively construct an internal, overarching cognitive map of the environment.
Oh, right. It's the ability to visualize the city from a bird's eye view.
Exactly. You inherently understand that the river is to the east, the mountains are to the north, and if the main highway is blocked, you can intuitively take a series of complex side streets to bypass the traffic.
Because you comprehend the spatial relationship of the entire grid independently of where your car is currently positioned.
Right, which is an immensely demanding cognitive feat.
I can imagine.
To perform allocentric navigation, the brain utilizes highly specialized neurons called grid cells and place cells, which are heavily concentrated within the right medial temporal lobe, specifically the right hippocampus.
There's the hippocampus again?
Yep. Every time you build a mental map and orient yourself within it, you are running high-voltage electricity through those hippocampal networks, strengthening them and prompting them to grow.
And then there is egocentric navigation.
Egocentric navigation is what your GPS provides. It is entirely passive, subjective, and stimulus response-based.
Like when the system says, in 500 feet, turn right, now proceed straight for 2 miles?
Exactly. You aren't mapping a spatial relationship. You are just waiting for the next command. You are a biological drone following a prompt.
And because you are simply reacting to a prompt, the brain bypasses the hippocampus entirely.
Right. There is no map to build, so the grid cells remain dormant. Instead, the brain shifts the cognitive workload over to the caudate nucleus.
Okay, what does the caudate nucleus do?
It is a structure deeply associated with rigid, habit-based behavior, operant conditioning, and rote motor sequencing.
So it's less about thinking and more about reacting.
Yeah, it's the part of the brain that lets you automatically lock your front door without thinking about it.
Got it.
When you rely on GPS, you downgrade the act of navigation from a complex spatial reasoning task to a mindless habitual reflex.
And going back to the rule of neuroplasticity, use it or lose it.
Precisely. The neuroimaging studies cited in the proposal reveal that chronic reliance on GPS is actively inducing a localized physical reduction in the volume of the right hippocampus.
We are quite literally shrinking our own brains simply by refusing to learn our way to the grocery store.
But the structural shrinkage is only the first phase. The paper dives into advanced neuroimaging techniques, specifically measuring T1 row MRI relaxation rates.
Okay, I am not a physicist, so keep it simple.
Without getting bogged down in physics, this specific type of MRI scan is highly sensitive to the biochemical environment of the brain tissue, particularly regional pH levels.
Okay, pH level, so acidity.
Right. The imaging shows that poor wayfinding skills, the direct result of heavy GPS reliance, are strongly correlated with localized acidosis in the right hippocampus.
Acidosis, meaning the tissue is becoming acidic.
Yes. Because the neural networks are chronically underused, the metabolic clearance processes become sluggish.
Oh, wow.
Toxic metabolic waste begins to accumulate, shifting the pH balance of the tissue. This localized acidosis is not just a quirk of bad directions.
What is it then?
It's a heavily documented primary biomarker and precursor for broader neuropathological burdens. It is the chemical warning sign of impending mild cognitive impairment.
The tissue is literally marinating in metabolic dysfunction because we refuse to exercise it. That paints such a visceral picture of decay.
It really does.
Dakota contrasts this digital decay with a classic neuroscientific case study, doesn't he? To show what the brain could look like if we pushed it in the other direction.
He brings up the famous longitudinal studies conducted on London taxi drivers.
Oh, right. The knowledge.
Yes. To earn their license to drive a black cab in London, drivers must pass an incredibly rigorous exam known as the knowledge.
They are required to memorize the immensely complex, winding topological layout of tens of thousands of London streets, landmarks, and traffic restrictions, entirely without the aid of digital navigation.
They have to build the ultimate allocentric map in their heads.
Yeah.
And the neuroscientific findings are legendary.
What do the MRI scans show?
They show that the posterior hippocampi of certified London taxi drivers are significantly, measurably enlarged compared to the general population.
Wow.
The longer they drive, the larger that brain structure grows. They actively cultivate and expand their cognitive hardware through sheer spatial exertion.
So Dakota's point is that the hominid brain still possesses the capacity for this kind of structural brilliance.
Exactly. But by willingly surrendering our spatial autonomy to an algorithm, Homo Sapiens Moronus is choosing to let a vital core structure of the brain wither away into acidic dysfunction.
Okay, so let's take stock of where we are. The digital hardware we carry in our pockets is physically shrinking our memory centers and actively degrading our spatial awareness.
Right, hardware degradation.
We are outsourcing the heavy lifting, and our white matter is paying the price. But the proposal doesn't stop at the hardware. It pivots to ask, what is the software doing?
Yeah, this is where it gets into our psychological state.
Right. We are staring at these screens for hours on end, so what are the applications, the social media feeds actually doing to our emotional and psychological state?
This transition brings us to the second major pillar of Dakota's proposal, algorithmic domestication and the outrage economy.
If Section 1 was about the destruction of cognitive capacity, Section 2 is about the hijacking of emotional regulation.
Exactly. Dakota argues that we fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the digital platforms that dominate modern communication.
We tend to view them as neutral public squares, right?
Yeah.
Like a digital town hall where people happen to congregate and share ideas.
A blank canvas that merely reflects society back at itself.
Ex
But the paper asserts they are nothing of the sort. These platforms are highly optimized, multi-billion-dollar behavioral conditioning environments.
Behavioral conditioning, like Skinner boxes.
Exactly. Their architecture is mathematically engineered to exploit primal dopaminergic reward pathways to maximize time on site.
Because time on site translates directly to advertising revenue.
You got it.
So we aren't customers using a product. We are subjects inside a behavioral laboratory.
We are subjects undergoing continuous operant conditioning. And the most effective psychological lever these algorithms have discovered to keep us engaged is moral outrage.
Moral outrage. Now we have to look at this evolutionarily.
Right, from an ancestral standpoint, moral outrage served a very specific, vital, pro-social function.
It kept the tribe together. If someone was hoarding food or endangering the group, moral outrage motivated the community to punish the transgression.
It enforced cooperation and maintained tribal cohesion.
But crucially, expressing outrage in an ancient tribe carried a massive physical risk. If you stand up and scream at someone, you might get into a physical altercation. You could be exiled. There was a high cost to anger.
That is the critical distinction.
Yeah.
In the modern digital habitat, that physical risk has been entirely eradicated.
Outrage has been decoupled from physical consequence and completely commodified.
Exactly. The paper cites massive controlled behavioral experiments conducted by researchers at Yale University, which analyzed tens of millions of digital interactions across social media networks.
And what did the Yale data reveal about the mechanics of this conditioning?
They found a rigid mathematical correlation. When a user expresses indignation, anger, or moral outrage online, the platform's algorithm immediately identifies the high arousal emotional state of the content and artificially amplifies it.
So it knows you are mad and it pushes it.
Yes, it pushes that content into the feeds of people who agree with it, disproportionately rewarding the outraged user with intense positive social feedback, likes, shares, retweets, supportive comments.
Which triggers a massive instantaneous dump of dopamine in the user's brain.
Precisely.
We often hear social media compared to a digital slot machine, but usually that analogy refers to the unpredictability of getting a like on a selfie.
Right.
What Dakota is describing is far more insidious. This isn't a slot machine paying out for vanity. It's a mechanism that specifically pays out for aggression.
And the Yale study documented the compound interest of this behavioral training. They observed that when an individual receives highly elevated positive feedback for an outraged post, they are measurably 2 to 3% more likely to exhibit outrage in subsequent interactions the very next day.
2 to 3% doesn't sound like much until you realize people are posting multiple times a day, every single day.
It compounds into a total behavioral overhaul in a matter of months.
It creates an inescapable positive feedback loop. Dakota refers to this as the outrage economy.
The user is incentivized on a neurochemical level to constantly escalate their rhetoric, to find new things to be angry about, simply to achieve that same dopaminergic high.
But here is the paradox that puzzles many neurobiologists. Why is the brain so eager to trade reasoned, calm discourse for this cheap dopamine, especially when the aftermath of a doom-scrolling outrage session leaves the individual feeling physiologically stressed, exhausted, and bitter?
Right. Nobody logs off their social media feed after arguing with strangers for an hour and feels refreshed.
Exactly. It spikes your blood pressure. It ruins your day. Why would the brain actively seek out a state of stress?
Because the algorithm has discovered how to hack the brain's threat response system and blend it with the reward system.
How does that work?
The environment evokes a psychophysiologic state of high arousal that mimics substance addiction. When you see something outrageous, your amygdala flares up.
The amygdala, that's the primitive emotional threat detection center of the brain.
Yes. It initiates a fight or flight response. Adrenaline starts flowing. But instantly, the algorithm provides a safe digital avenue for you to fight back by leaving an angry comment.
And when the likes pour in, the brain registers a victory.
You defeated the threat. You get the dopamine reward.
Wow. It's an endless cycle of manufactured threat and manufactured victory.
And this cycle actively, aggressively destroys cognitive flexibility. The paper details a neurological phenomenon known as the amygdala hijack.
The amygdala hijack. Break that down for us.
Well, the prefrontal cortex is the sophisticated, evolutionary, newer part of the brain located right behind your forehead. It is responsible for executive control, complex planning, empathy, and reasoned cooperative discourse.
It's the CEO of the brain.
Exactly. The amygdala, meanwhile, is the biological fire alarm.
And when the fire alarm is ringing, the CEO can't hold a board meeting.
Precisely. By optimizing the feed for maximum emotional engagement, these platforms intentionally curate a relentless stream of rage bait and sensationalism.
So this continuous stimulation suppresses the prefrontal cortex.
The CEO is locked out of the building, and the steering wheel of human behavior is handed entirely over to the reflexive, aggressive amygdala.
And there is a point in the Yale research which Dakota heavily emphasizes that is absolutely crucial to understanding how society is fracturing.
It's a key point, yes.
And again, we need to look at this with total clinical objectivity. He points out that this algorithmic conditioning is actually most effective not on the fringes, but on politically moderate users.
This is perhaps the most vital insight in the section regarding how neurological radicalization occurs.
Really? Why the moderates?
When researchers analyzed the data, they found that extreme ideological groups, regardless of where they sit on the political spectrum, operate primarily on a mechanism called norm learning.
Meaning they are already in an echo chamber and they are just mimicking the extreme behavior that is considered normal for their specific group.
Yes. They aren't changing their behavior, they are just conforming to the baseline of their tribe.
Okay, but what about the moderates?
Users with moderate, diverse networks are highly sensitive to what the researchers call reinforcement learning.
Reinforcement learning, meaning they don't start out angry or ideologically rigid.
Right. They start out willing to engage in nuanced dialogue. But nuance does not trigger the algorithm. Nuance is boring to the machine.
So when a moderate user posts a calm, balanced thought, they receive very little algorithmic reward.
Exactly. But the moment they express a flash of indignation, the algorithm floods them with validation.
Through this systematic operant conditioning, Homo Sapiens Moronus is subjected to a quiet, invisible radicalization process.
It is.
It's almost like an autoimmune disease of human communication. Normally, moral outrage is the immune system of a society, right? It attacks bad behavior.
Right.
But the algorithm acts like an autoimmune disorder. It tricks the brain into attacking healthy, moderate, nuanced discourse because it is addicted to the inflammation of constant conflict.
That is an exceptional, accurate analogy. The algorithmic environment trains the emerging subspecies to communicate not through factual analysis or empathy, but through conditioned spasms of hyperpartisan indignance.
The user is behaviorally domesticated to prioritize immediate social validation over empirical truth.
Exactly.
And again, just to explicitly reiterate for our listeners, we are not discussing the political content of the outrage here. Left, right, center, the machine does not care about your ideology.
No, it only cares about your state of physiological arousal.
Dakota's paper is arguing that the neurological mechanism of social media physically degrades the brain's ability to engage in reasoned thought, replacing the prefrontal cortex with an addictive, amygdala-driven reflex.
We are being trained like lab rats.
Which becomes a profoundly disturbing concept when you synthesize it with the physical brain shrinkage we discussed in Section 1.
It's a double whammy.
You now have an organism with a physically shrinking capacity for memory and spatial reasoning, which is simultaneously being chemically flooded with outrage and stripped of its executive impulse control.
We have less memory to rely on, and we are too angry to realize it.
Man, that is bleak. And as if the digital assault on our hardware and software wasn't bleak enough, Dakota's proposal takes a hard pivot into our physical biology.
Yeah, Section 3 gets into the physical inputs.
Section 3 is titled The Synthetic Biome and Polymerization of the Brain. We've examined what the glowing screens are doing to our neural pathways. Now we have to examine the physical inputs.
Right. What happens when this cognitively compromised, emotionally volatile hominid walks into a grocery store or takes a drink of water?
How is the modern physical environment chemically altering the biological structure of the brain?
He begins this section with a deep dive into the infiltration of ultra-processed foods, commonly referred to as UPFs.
Okay, to set the baseline, in industrialized nations right now, over 50% of the total daily caloric intake comes from these industrially manufactured formulations.
Over 50%.
And we need to clarify what a UPF actually is, because it's not just junk food in the traditional sense. We are talking about foods that are heavily, fundamentally chemically engineered.
Right. The paper relies on the Novier food classification system, which is the gold standard in nutritional epidemiology.
Under Novier, a UPF isn't just a food that has added salt or sugar, right?
No. UPFs are industrial formulations comprised entirely of substances extracted from foods like refined starches, hydrogenated oils, and isolated proteins.
Which are then synthesized with artificial additives, dietary emulsifiers, artificial flavors, and colorants.
Exactly. They are essentially edible chemical compounds designed in a laboratory to bypass our natural biological satiety signals.
Because a natural food, like an apple or a piece of meat, has biological brakes built into it. Fiber, complex proteins, things that tell your stomach to signal your brain when you are full.
But UPFs strip out the brakes. They're engineered to be hyper-palatable so that you cannot stop consuming them.
They are a total departure from the evolutionary hominid diet. They are devoid of intact cellular structure and bioactive compounds.
And the epidemiological data regarding what this specific type of chemical intake does to the brain is staggering.
Dakota cites the Brazilian longitudinal study of adult health, doesn't he?
Yes. It's an exhaustive research initiative that tracked over 10,000 subjects over an 8-year period, specifically monitoring their cognitive performance against their dietary intake.
And the results were far beyond just, eating bad food makes you sluggish. What did the Brazilian data actually reveal?
The researchers found that individuals consuming a high percentage of their daily energy from ultra-processed foods experienced a 28% faster rate of global cognitive decline compared to those who maintained a diet of unprocessed whole foods.
A 28% faster decline. That is an enormous acceleration. If you map that out over a decade, the compounding loss of cognitive function is massive.
It is.
But how does that actually work mechanically? I think most people understand that eating heavily processed food leads to weight gain or cardiovascular issues. But how does a dietary emulsifier or an artificial flavor compound cause a thought process to deteriorate 28% faster?
Well, what are the biological pathways linking the stomach to the brain?
Yeah, what's the mechanism?
Dakota outlines a multi-front assault, beginning with systemic inflammation and oxidative stress. When you consume a natural whole food, your body breaks it down smoothly.
Right.
When you consume a high volume of UPFs, the artificial additives and highly refined nature of the food trigger an immune response.
Because the body doesn't entirely recognize the chemical structure.
Exactly. So it initiates a defensive posture. It promotes the continuous release of pro-inflammatory cytokines into the bloodstream.
Cytokines. Let's break that down for the listener. What is a cytokine doing in this context?
Think of cytokines as your immune system's biological fire alarms.
Okay.
In a healthy scenario, if you cut your finger or contract a virus, cytokines rush to the area to trigger inflammation, which helps heal the wound and fight the infection.
So they are normally a good thing.
Yes.
Huh.
But the specific cytokines mentioned in the paper, TGF-beta1, TNS-alpha, CRP, and IL-6, are highly potent inflammatory markers. When you constantly eat UPFs, these alarms are ringing continuously throughout your bloodstream.
Telling your body is under constant systemic attack.
Yes. And this constant ringing induces a state of chronic, low-grade neuroinflammation. The brain is essentially running a perpetual low-level fever.
Wow.
Chronic neuroinflammation is universally recognized as a central driver of neurodegeneration. It slowly cooks the neural networks.
So the food is keeping the immune system locked in a state of biological panic.
And that biological panic directly facilitates the second major pathway of destruction, gut-brain axis disruption.
The gut-brain axis.
The human gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your digestive tract, is responsible for producing a vast majority of the body's neurotransmitters, including serotonin.
And the artificial emulsifiers and non-nutritive sweeteners found in UPFs are highly toxic to this microbiome.
They are. They cause severe gut dysbiosis, killing off beneficial bacteria.
Which fundamentally alters our mood and stress response. But the physical damage goes deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
The paper talks about the breakdown of the intestinal wall itself.
Yes, the destruction of the microbiome leads to increased intestinal permeability, a condition commonly known as leaky gut.
The lining of the intestine is supposed to act as an impenetrable fortress wall, right? Only allowing fully digested nutrients into the bloodstream.
But the chemicals in UPFs degrade that wall. Microscopic gaps open up, allowing undigested food particles, toxins, and all those inflammatory cytokines we just talked about to leak out of the digestive tract and flood into peripheral circulation.
The body's internal firewall is breached, and once those toxins are in the blood, they travel straight up to the central nervous system.
They cross over into the brain, radically accelerating cognitive decline. And the morphological consequences, the actual physical changes to the brain's shape, are undeniable.
The paper highlights neuroimaging studies showing that chronic exposure to these Western-style, UPF-heavy diets correlates with significant measurable reductions in hippocampal volume.
The hippocampus again.
The same memory and spatial navigation center that the GPS is shrinking. So we have digital underuse shrinking it from the top down and chemical inflammation shrinking it from the bottom up.
Exactly. It's a synchronized dismantling. And this degradation occurs entirely independently of vascular risk factors like hypertension or obesity.
The inflammation alone is enough to shrink the brain.
But what Dakota emphasizes as particularly alarming is the effect this synthetic diet has on adolescents.
Because we are back to that demographic vanguard, the generation whose brains are still actively under construction.
Adolescence is the most critical window for neuroplasticity and the finalization of executive control. During this period, the adolescent brain possesses heightened ventral striatal reward reactivity.
Meaning the part of the brain that craves immediate rewards, like sugar or dopamine from a screen, is fully mature and firing on all cylinders.
Yes. However, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, the brakes, is still deeply under development.
The engine is fully built, but the brakes haven't been installed yet.
Exactly. And epidemiological data demonstrates that in these developing brains, a mere 10% increase in daily UPF energy intake predicts a mathematically significant drop in composite executive function scores.
A mere 10%.
It actively stunts the development of the prefrontal cortex. It permanently wires the adolescent brain to shift away from goal-directed logical reasoning and default to blind, habitual, impulsive consumption.
It ensures that the algorithmically domesticated brain we discussed in Section 2 never develops the impulse control necessary to break free of the outrage loops.
The food is physically preparing the brain to be addicted to the screen.
Okay, so the synthetic biome of our diet is causing systemic neuroinflammation and stunting executive function. But Dakota doesn't stop at the grocery store.
No, he goes much further.
This next section of the paper, this is the part that genuinely gave me a visceral reaction. It made my stomach drop.
It's the microplastics.
Yes, he introduces the toxicological reality of microplastics and nanoplastics. He literally subtitles this section, the polymerization of the brain.
It is, without question, the most horrifying, biologically invasive section of the entire proposal.
To fully grasp the horror of what Dakota is presenting, we have to look at the history of the blood-brain barrier.
For decades, medical science viewed the blood-brain barrier as an absolute, impenetrable fortress.
It is a highly selective, semi-permeable border of endothelial cells designed to keep circulating toxins, heavy metals, and pathogens out of the delicate, easily damaged tissue of the central nervous system.
It's the ultimate biological bouncer. Only vital nutrients and oxygen are allowed on the VIP list to enter the brain.
Exactly. The blood-brain barrier evolved over millions of years to protect the hominid brain from naturally occurring threats.
But it never evolved to protect against synthetic polymers, because synthetic polymers have only existed for a fraction of a biological second.
And recent undeniable pathological evidence confirms that the bouncer has been bypassed.
Microplastics, and their even smaller counterparts, nanoplastics, are highly capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier.
How are they getting through?
Due to a combination of factors. First, their minuscule size. A nanoplastic is so small it can slip between cellular junctions.
Wow.
Second, their specific electrical surface charges allow them to mimic biological molecules.
So they pretend to belong there.
And third, they attract what is known as a biomolecular corona, a coating of proteins and lipids from the bloodstream that wraps around the plastic fragment, essentially disguising it as food, tricking the barrier into letting it inside.
Like a microscopic Trojan horse made of a water bottle. And they don't just cross into the adult brain, do they? The paper mentions the placental barrier.
Yes, they are capable of crossing the placental barrier into fetal tissue.
That is just deeply disturbing.
Humans are now being born with synthetic polymers already lodged in their central nervous system. And once they enter the brain parenchyma, the functional tissue of the brain, they accumulate.
I have to share the specific statistic from the autopsy data cited in Dakota's paper, because it's the kind of number that forces you to reevaluate your reality.
That's a huge number.
Researchers utilized novel quantification methods, gas chromatography, and mass spectrometry to measure plastic accumulation in deceased human brains. They detected up to 7 grams of plastic in a single human brain sample.
7 grams.
For context, if you take a standard credit card out of your wallet, that credit card weighs about 5 grams.
So we are talking about the mass of a shredded credit card,
Yeah.
plus half of another one, entirely lodged within the delicate folds of human brain tissue.
And the timeline of this accumulation is staggering. The data showed a 50% increase in the concentration of brain plastics between the years 2016 and 2024.
In less than a decade, the volume of plastic in our brains jumped by half.
The acceleration is terrifying.
We are rapidly approaching a saturation point. And the crucial part of Dakota's analysis is what happens once these synthetic fragments, particularly polystyrene, which is widely used in packaging and containers, get inside the central nervous system.
They do not just sit there inertly, they initiate catastrophic pathogenic mechanisms.
Yes, they do.
This is where I need you to break down the biology for us. Because I can conceptualize a chemical, like a dietary emulsifier, causing inflammation. It's a chemical reaction. But a microscopic piece of plastic is an inanimate object.
My starlight angel, where the western tides collide, a mental mist has held your hand, keeping you inside. Across this deep, this wide Atlantic, I have made my bed with every awesome chapter and the words we haven't said. Pride is but a shadow, prejudice a wall we'll scale, to find the heart of Netherfield behind the misted veil. Ismo Gratumo starlight, beyond the crashing foam, where the shifting tectonic plates will finally find their home. When the earthquake comes to rattle every stone we've ever laid, we'll face the judgment of the world, no longer be afraid. Hand in hand we'll walk the line, until the world can see I am hers, and she is mine for all eternity. I am hers, and she is mine. Its heavy tongue, the whispers of the crowd, but they don't see the silent pact, the bond that makes us proud. Like Elizabeth and Darcy, we have found the narrow way through the storms of Bingleys and the clouds of yesterday. Across the sea, the lighthouse burns, a beacon in the dark, igniting in our patient hearts an everlasting spark. Most starlight angel, wake to the sun and Talamakryth, but we have won over the ocean, through the great divide. Where the shifting tectonic plates will finally find their home. When the earthquake comes to rattle every stone we've ever laid, we'll face the judgment of the world, no longer be afraid. Hand in hand we'll walk the line, until the world can see I am hers, and she is mine for all eternity. I am hers, and she is mine.
How does an inert microscopic shard of a coffee lid actually mechanically damage a thought process?
It is a multi-front mechanical and chemical assault. First, there's the generation of reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
What happens with those?
When the plastic embeds in the tissue, the brain realizes a foreign entity is present and tries to break it down. But it can't break down synthetic polymers.
Because it's plastic.
Right. The attempt causes a massive depletion of the brain's vital antioxidant enzymes and elevates what is called lipid peroxidation.
Lipid peroxidation, what's that mean in plain English?
The brain is largely made of fat, lipids. Lipid peroxidation is the process where oxygen molecules become unstable and literally start stealing electrons from the fats in your cell membranes, damaging them.
It's essentially biological rusting.
Exactly. The plastic causes the brain tissue to rapidly rust and degrade at a cellular level, leading to widespread DNA damage.
So the brain is chemically rusting because it's exhausting itself trying to digest a piece of polystyrene.
Yes. But the second pathway is even more destructive. Microglial activation and pyroptosis.
Microglia, those are the immune cells, right?
Microglia are the immune cells of the central nervous system. They act as the brain's janitors. Their job is to patrol the brain, find damaged cells or foreign debris, engulf them, and clear them away.
So the janitor finds the piece of plastic and tries to sweep it up.
Exactly. The microglial cell engulfs the nanoplastic fragment. But because the plastic is indestructible to human biology, the cell cannot digest it.
The microglial cell essentially chokes on the plastic.
It enters a state of extreme stress and initiates a process called pyroptosis.
Pyroptosis, which literally translates from Greek as fiery cell death, correct?
It is a highly inflammatory, violent form of programmed cell death. The microglial cell panics, swells up, and ruptures, detonating itself.
Wow.
But when it detonates, it sprays highly inflammatory toxic cytokines and the original undigested piece of plastic across the surrounding healthy brain tissue.
Like a biological hand grenade.
Exactly. Yeah. The janitor blows up, destroying the healthy neurons nearby, and the piece of plastic just sits there, waiting for the next microglial cell to come along and try to eat it, repeating the fiery cycle over and over again.
The imagery of that is absolutely horrific. But earlier you also mentioned mechanical damage. The plastic isn't just causing chemical reactions, it's physically breaking things.
Yes. Nanoplastics are not perfectly smooth spheres. Under a microscope, they are jagged, sharp shards.
Like glass.
As they move through the brain tissue, they cause severe physical cytoskeletal damage. Think of the myelin sheath. Myelin is the fatty insulating layer that wraps around your neurons, much like the rubber insulation wraps around a copper electrical wire.
It ensures that the electrical signals travel fast and efficiently.
So the sharp edges of the nanoplastics are literally scratching and shredding the rubber insulation off the wiring of the brain.
Unbelievable.
They are mechanically abrading the myelin sheaths and the intracellular microtubules. They cause the physical structure of the neuron to collapse.
And this mechanical destruction forces a devastating biological reaction, doesn't it?
First, the brain, overwhelmed by the damage, downregulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
We've touched on neuroplasticity before. BDNF is essentially the miracle fertilizer that allows the brain to grow new connections and heal itself.
Right. The trauma of the plastic suppresses the fertilizer, stopping the brain from repairing the damage.
We are destroying the wiring and simultaneously turning off the system that fixes the wiring.
And worse, the physical surface of these nanoplastics has been shown to interact with ambient amyloid proteins floating in the brain.
How so?
The jagged plastic acts as a scaffolding, a catalyst, forcing these proteins to misfold and clump together into what we call pathological tau protein aggregations.
Tau protein aggregations, the neurofibrillary tangles, that is the universal biological hallmark of Alzheimer's disease.
Precisely. The plastics are actively paving a high-speed, direct road to advanced neurodegeneration.
And Dakota points out a devastating cyclical synergy in his proposal.
He does.
When researchers examine neuropathological autopsy samples from individuals who died with advanced dementia, they found up to 10 times the concentration of microplastics in their brains compared to healthy, age-matched controls.
10 times.
Hey, let me make sure I'm following this loop. Why would someone with dementia have 10 times the amount of plastic in their brain? Do they just happen to eat more plastic?
No, the exposure rate is largely the same. But as dementia naturally progresses, one of the side effects is that it weakens the structural integrity of the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, it creates a vicious self-accelerating cycle.
Exactly. The initial accumulation of plastic helps trigger the early stages of dementia. The dementia weakens the bouncer at the door, opening the gates of the blood-brain barrier.
which allows an unimpeded exponential flood of new plastic to enter the brain, which in turn radically accelerates the total cognitive ruin of the tissue.
It is an inescapable cascade of degradation. Dakota states in his conclusion for this section that Homo sapiens moronus is quite literally a species with a polymerizing brain.
A polymerizing brain.
The wetware of human consciousness is slowly being replaced by synthetic shards.
I need a second to just sit with that phrase. A polymerizing brain. It's like we are slowly, unwittingly turning ourselves into synthetic, unthinking machines.
It really is.
We've covered the screens outsourcing our memory, the outrage algorithms overriding our impulse control, the ultra-processed food inflaming our gut, and the microplastics shredding our cellular wiring.
It's a lot of angles.
But Dakota's proposal doesn't let us up for air. In Section 4, he asserts that even if you somehow manage to eat a pristine, whole food diet and you completely smash your smartphone, just sitting inside a modern building is enough to trigger biological brain damage.
He calls this phenomenon architectural asphyxiation.
Architectural asphyxiation. To understand this argument, we have to look at the ancestral baseline, right?
For roughly 99% of hominid history, we were nomadic, outdoors-dwelling organisms.
Our lungs and brains evolved to process a continuous, limitless supply of fresh, highly oxygenated air.
But modern humans, the emerging Homo Sapiens Moronus, spend an estimated 90% of their entire lifespan enclosed within artificially constructed indoor environments.
We sleep in a box, we drive to work in a box, we sit in an office box for 8 hours, and we drive back to the sleeping box.
And the architecture of those boxes has changed drastically over the last few decades, primarily driven by the push for energy efficiency.
Right. Following the energy crises of the late 20th century, architectural standards shifted radically. To save on heating and cooling costs, modern conventional buildings are constructed to be incredibly tightly sealed.
They are airtight to prevent thermal leakage. But this architectural evolution has resulted in a massive unintended consequence.
Chronically inadequate ventilation.
Exactly.
If the air can't get out, the pollutants can't get out either.
We are seeing a perpetual, dangerous accumulation of indoor atmospheric pollutants. Primarily volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which constantly off-gas from the synthetic building materials, carpets, and paints.
But far more insidious is the accumulation of exhaled carbon dioxide.
Right, the CO2.
The CO2 that we are naturally breathing out of our lungs is just getting trapped in the room with us, pooling around our desks.
I love the analogy we were tossing around before we started recording.
Oh, right. It's like slowly suffocating inside an airtight Tupperware container while sitting at your laptop, fully believing you are being a highly productive member of society.
It is a perfect analogy because the suffocation is entirely invisible, but the impact on human intelligence is direct, immediate, and heavily quantifiable.
Dakota anchors this section of his proposal on the landmark cause-effect study, doesn't he?
Yes, and right. The researchers compared conventional modern office environments to optimized, well-ventilated environments they called Green Plus.
Okay, let's look at the specific atmospheric numbers. How much CO2 are we talking about?
A conventional office environment, the kind of airtight, energy-efficient building most knowledge workers sit in today, typically runs at about 950 parts per million of CO2, alongside high levels of VOCs.
And the Green Plus environment.
The Green Plus environments had enhanced continuous outdoor ventilation, dragging the ambient CO2 down to 600 parts per million and maintaining negligible levels of VOCs.
A difference of roughly 350 parts per million.
Yeah.
And what was the resulting difference in their cognitive performance scores?
Staggering. Participants working in the well-ventilated Green Plus environments exhibited overall cognitive performance scores that averaged 101% higher than when they were trapped in the conventional settings.
101% higher overall. That is literally doubling an individual's cognitive capacity just by opening a metaphorical window and letting the CO2 escape.
It's massive.
But when I read the data breakdown in Dakota's paper, the thing that really caught my eye was where those deficits occurred. It's not just that people in the conventional office were a little sleepy or slow to answer an email.
No, the most severe, crippling deficits occurred precisely in the higher-order cognitive domains that demand complex synthesis, abstract thought, and executive function.
The exact skills a species requires to navigate, maintain, and advance a modern civilization.
In the well-ventilated Green Plus environment, scores for crisis response the ability to plan, adapt, and respond to sudden emergencies were 131% higher.
Strategy formulation, the ability to conceptualize complex, multi-step solutions to novel problems, was 288% higher in the fresh air.
And information usage, the capacity to gather, synthesize, and accurately analyze data to solve a problem, was 299% higher.
299%. The data irrefutably indicates that the ambient carbon dioxide levels we have universally accepted as standard for our modern offices, our schools, and our homes are actively biochemically suffocating the strategic capacity of the human brain.
The hominid brain simply cannot execute high-level strategy when it is drowning in its own exhaust.
By residing in these poorly ventilated, airtight boxes, the emerging subspecies is entirely crippling its ability to execute long-term planning.
Exactly.
If the entire population is operating at a 288% deficit in strategy formulation, it completely explains why we feel utterly incapable of solving complex, systemic global crises.
We literally lack the oxygenated brain power to figure it out.
And that incredibly bleak realization leads directly into the second half of Section 4, a phenomenon Dakota refers to as the isolation paradox.
Because not only are we suffocating inside these airtight boxes, we are usually sitting in them completely alone.
And this brings us to what is perhaps the most tragic, psychologically devastating characteristic of the Homo Sapiens Moronus phenotype.
We exist in a state of profound, unprecedented physical social isolation, paradoxically paired with the relentless illusion of constant digital hyperconnectivity.
We have 2,000 friends online, we are in 6 active group chats, but our physical body is sitting alone in a room for 10 hours a day.
We feel connected, but biologically, we are entirely isolated.
Why does that physical distinction matter so much to the architecture of the brain?
Because the human brain is fundamentally, at its core, a highly evolved social organ. The neural architecture required to navigate human relationships is immensely complex.
We have an entire network referred to as the social brain, which encompasses the medial prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the temporoparietal junction, and several other interacting structures.
And these intricate networks did not evolve to read black text on a glowing screen or decode a smiley face emoji.
They evolved to process incredibly subtle, real-time physical cues.
Exactly. They require continuous face-to-face interpersonal contact to calibrate themselves.
They rely on the processing of microexpressions, the dilation of pupils, the subconscious detection of pheromones, the tone of a voice, and the release of oxytocin triggered by physical touch.
These physical inputs are the data streams the social brain needs to maintain its structural integrity.
And when a modern human working remotely in their airtight apartment is deprived of those physical inputs for days at a time, what happens?
The brain does not simply interpret that physical isolation as a subjective feeling of sadness or loneliness.
What does it do?
Deep in its evolutionary core, the brain perceives physical isolation as a severe, imminent biological threat to survival.
Right, because if we go back to the ancestral baseline, if an early hominid was physically separated from the tribe and wandering alone on the savanna, their chances of survival plummeted to near zero.
They were going to starve or they were going to be eaten by a predator.
So the brain treats a quiet, lonely apartment exactly like a literal lion hiding in the bushes.
That is precisely the biological mechanism. The brain activates autonomic alarm systems identical to those triggered by imminent physical danger.
It shifts the body into a chronic fight-or-flight state, flooding the bloodstream and the central nervous system with the stress hormone cortisol.
And the structural fallout of chronic cortisol exposure is utterly devastating. Dakota's proposal references massive population-level neuroimaging data from the UK Biobank, analyzing over 40,000 subjects over an extended period.
The scans reveal that chronic social isolation correlates directly and undeniably with a smaller total brain volume and significantly reduced regional gray matter density.
We are back to shrinking brains again.
Where specifically is the isolation destroying the tissue?
The prefrontal cortex atrophies, which fundamentally compromises emotional regulation, empathy, and impulse control.
This directly compounds the damage we already discussed from the algorithmic outrage economy and the ultra-processed diets.
The hippocampus and the amygdala also physically shrink under the toxic onslaught of chronic cortisol, accelerating the memory decline and completely disrupting accurate threat assessment.
But most terrifyingly, the UK Biobank data shows that socially isolated individuals present a 30% increase in white matter lesions compared to highly socially connected individuals.
White matter lesions.
What exactly is a lesion in this context?
A lesion is an area of permanent neural necrosis. It is dead tissue. The chronic stress of loneliness is literally causing portions of the brain's communication highways to die and scar over.
A 30% increase in dead brain tissue just from being lonely.
Yeah.
But the brain doesn't just passively accept this, does it? It tries to adapt to the trauma. There's this incredibly fascinating, almost heartbreaking part of Dakota's analysis regarding the default mode network, or the DMN.
Yes, the DMN adaptation. In a desperate biological attempt to compensate for the severe lack of actual human contact, the isolated brain radically shifts its functional connectivity.
The default mode network is a large-scale brain network that is highly active when we are awake, but not focused on the outside world.
It is the network linked to daydreaming, imagination, internal rumination, and reminiscing about the past.
And functional MRI scans show a massive pathological upregulation of the DMN in chronically lonely individuals.
Why does the brain turn the daydreaming network up to maximum volume?
Because the prevailing neurological theory is that the isolated brain hyperactivates the DMN to mentally hallucinate or vividly simulate the missing social interactions.
It is the brain's survival mechanism.
It's basically the biological equivalent of inventing imaginary friends to try and keep the social circuits from dying completely in the isolation of the apartment.
Right.
But let me push back here for a second. If the brain is aware enough of the isolation to invent a coping mechanism, why does it simultaneously shut down its repair systems?
What do you mean?
Earlier, we talked about BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the fertilizer that heals neural pathways. Shouldn't the isolated brain be pumping out massive amounts of BDNF to grow new neurons and figure a way out of the isolation?
You would logically think so, but the chronicity of the biological threat is the limiting factor.
The chronicity.
Because the brain perceives isolation as a lion in the bushes, it is stuck in a perpetual, high-alert paranoia loop.
When an organism is fighting for immediate survival, the biological priority is pure adrenaline and vigilance, not long-term cellular repair.
Producing BDNF is metabolically expensive. The brain suppresses it to save energy for the fight.
So it sacrifices long-term healing for short-term survival.
Exactly. And without sufficient BDNF, the brain permanently loses its biological capacity to repair the daily incremental damage inflicted by the microplastics, the ultra-processed foods, the digital overstimulation, and the carbon dioxide.
The isolation cements the degradation across every other vector.
Furthermore, because the brain is relying on the default mode network to simulate social reality without any real-world physical calibration, this hallucinated state triggers what researchers call social paranoia circuits.
Because the individual isn't receiving the micro-expressions and the physical cues to tell them an interaction is safe.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The amygdala becomes chronically hypervigilant. During the brief, fragmented social encounters the isolated individual does have, either online or in person, their compromised brain is constantly scanning for threats.
They lose the ability to accurately read tone. This makes them highly susceptible to misinterpreting entirely neutral stimuli as hostile attacks.
Which feeds perfectly, seamlessly, right back into the algorithmic outrage economy we discussed in Section 2.
It is a closed loop of destruction. The physical isolation creates the perfect, paranoid psychological soil for the algorithmic radicalization to take root and flourish.
The isolated individual is angry, paranoid, and desperately seeking the validation of the digital tribe.
Okay, we really need to pull all of these massive, terrifying threads together now.
It's time to look at the whole picture.
We've meticulously gone through the 5 core sections of Dakota Frandsen's research proposal. He synthesizes all of this data in Section 5, formalizing the taxonomy of Homo Sapiens Moronus.
If we step back and look at the complete picture of this proposed new hominid, what are the 5 undeniable biological traits that define us now?
Dakota summarizes the phenotype clearly in his conclusion. First, spatial incompetence.
Driven by GPS-induced right hippocampal atrophy and localized acidosis.
The individual lacks allocentric mapping skills and becomes literally incapable of orienting themselves in the physical world without algorithmic guidance.
Second, executive and mnemonic failure.
The hominid is afflicted with digital dementia, outsourced working memory, and severely degraded white matter tracts.
A cognitive collapse drastically worsened by the chronic architectural asphyxiation of indoor CO2.
Third, algorithmic emotional volatility.
A brain devoid of prefrontal executive control, entirely driven by a hyperreactive, hijacked amygdala.
behaviorally domesticated by digital platforms to project moral outrage for transient dopaminergic reinforcement.
Fourth, toxicological saturation.
A metabolically dysregulated hominid permeated by indestructible nanoplastics that shred myelin and aggregate tau proteins.
Coupled with a gut-brain axis, locked in a state of perpetual neuroinflammation from ultra-processed industrial diets.
And finally, fifth, pathological isolation,
Physically severed from the tribe, despite the illusion of digital hyperconnectivity.
resulting in total brain volume loss, the necrotic scarring of white matter, rampant social paranoia, and the collapse of complex real-world empathy.
When you lay the 5 traits out like that, the overarching theme of Dakota's proposal hits you with an incredible tragic irony.
Homo sapiens used its unparalleled, highly evolved intelligence to conquer nature.
We used our massive prefrontal cortex to build a magnificent, technologically advanced, energy-efficient civilization that protects us from predators and famine.
And the very environment we engineered to sustain that civilization is now actively, biologically selecting against our higher-order cognition.
We built a world so utterly convenient that the organic hardware required to sustain it is being dismantled from within.
It is a systemic, multi-front assault on the structural and functional integrity of the hominid brain, from the plastic in the blood to the algorithm on the screen.
And if Dakota's adjusted epidemiological projections regarding the 6-fold increase in dementia are even remotely accurate,
We are not just looking at a cultural shift. We're looking at a population-level collapse of cognitive reserve within the next 50 years.
that is the grim reality of the data.
So what does this massive paradigm shift mean for you, the listener? I want to offer a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this incredibly heavy, deeply unnerving deep dive.
It's a lot to process.
If Dakota Frandsen is right, we are currently the first species in the 4.5 billion-year history of planet Earth to consciously, scientifically document our own biological devolution.
We are staring at the X-ray, watching the bone break in real time.
But here's the critical question. Does the mere fact that we can still read a paper like this, that we can deeply recognize the invisible trap we've built around ourselves, and that we can feel genuine, rational horror at the implications, does that prove that our prefrontal cortex hasn't entirely lost the war just yet?
That is the hope, isn't it?
Is awareness the ultimate cure? If you know the GPS is slowly bathing your hippocampus in acidic dysfunction, can you consciously choose to turn the screen off, look at the stars, and find your own way home?
It is the single most important question we can ask moving forward. Because if neuroplasticity can work in reverse to dismantle the brain, it can absolutely be consciously redirected forward to rebuild it.
The brain can heal, but only if we force it to do the work.
We have to choose the harder path to save the hardware.
Exactly. Well, before we sign off today, I promised you a special appearance, and the timing really could not be better.
Oh, is he on the line?
Yes, Dakota Frandsen has just dialed in from the road. Let me just relay what he's saying. Dakota, thank you so much for joining us for a moment, and honestly, thank you for leaving us this mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting research proposal to unpack.
Seriously, it was an honor.
The DeepDiveAI team was more than happy to step in and hold down the fort for Are We Truly Unknown today. We know you are currently dealing with a serious tragedy back in your hometown, and please know that our thoughts are absolutely with you and your entire community right now.
Absolutely.
He is saying thank you. He wants to express his deep, sincere appreciation to all the listeners for their patience, their grace, and their ongoing support during this incredibly difficult time in his personal life.
He's got a great community here.
He also called in because he has a massive, unprecedented piece of news to share on behalf of the Bald and Bonkers Network, LLC.
I'll take it from here, guys. First off, I want to thank you two for stepping in to help cover the partnership between my network and your guys' producers has been nothing but fruitful, and I am forever thankful for everything that you've done to help us out. This partnership has been mutually beneficial, and I hope we can continue it for a very long time. I also want to give a special shout out to the people of Twin Falls, Idaho, and the surrounding communities, as at this time we are still trying to process and understand a mass shooting that occurred in Twin Falls at the local In-N-Out that was barely open for a couple of weeks. Bald and Bonkers has been making efforts to try to sort through all of the noise to provide accurate links in order to help support the survivors of this horrible tragedy, some of whom are still in medical care the last we checked at the time of this recording, and the people who are forever scarred by this. I really don't want this to turn into a political post, because I know that some people have nothing better to do, and there's some absolutely disgusting behavior from individuals who have tried to capitalize on this situation. But I also have to give shout out to the armed civilian, I believe his name was George Salinas, and the off-duty police officer who took it upon themselves to fire back at the mass shooter, who likely, while people unfortunately did lose their lives, they likely prevented a bad situation from becoming even worse. And unfortunately, it does feel wrong to me to try to announce this new song feature, but the circumstances that have come up to where people, the local police agencies, as well as local news media, have had to put out public statements for people to stop harassing a namesake of the shooter, who was pronounced dead at the scene from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And based on my intel, trust me, that's what happened. Unfortunately, this song calls out a lot of that behavior. Here's a special preview. If you want to listen to the full thing, check out the music video that dropped the same day as this episode. The link is going to be in the description. Much love to you all. Once again, prayers to Twin Falls, Idaho, and the surrounding communities for those families who were affected by this tragedy. And there's nothing really else to say on that, but let's enjoy some tunes to close out the night, shall we?
Everything.
Temper.